Section 13, page 54. A flame darted from the logs, and she bent over the fire, stretching her thin hands so close to it that a faint hollow shone about the oval nails. The light touched the russet of the rings of dark hair escaping from her braids, and made her pale face paler. "There are plenty of people to tell you what to do," Archer rejoined, obscurely envious of them. "Oh, all my aunts, and my dear old granny." She considered the idea impartially. "They are all a little vexed with me for setting up for myself. Poor granny especially. She wanted to keep me with her, but I had to be free." He was impressed by this light way of speaking of the formidable Catherine, and moved by the thought of what must have given Madame Olenska this thirst for even the loneliest kind of for freedom. But the idea of Beaufort gaunted him. "I think I understand how you feel," he said. "Still, your family can advise you, explain differences, show you the way." She lifted her thin black eyebrows. "Is New York such a labyrinth? I thought it so straight up and down, like Fifth Avenue, and with all the cross streets numbered." She seemed to guess his faint disapproval of this, and added, with the rare smile that enchanted her whole face, "If you knew how I like it for just that, the straight up and downness, and the big honest labels on everything." He saw his chance. "Everything may be labeled, but everybody is not. Perhaps I might simplify too much, but you will warn me if I do." She turned from the fire to look at him. "There are only two people here who make me feel as if they understood what I mean, and could explain things to me. You and Mr. Beaufort." Archer winced at the joining of the names, and then, with a quick readjustment, understood, sympathized, and pitied. So close to the powers of evil she must have lived that she still breathed more freely in their air. But since she felt that he understood her also, his business would be to make her see Beaufort as he really was, with all he represented, and abhor it. He answered gently, "I understand. But just at first, don't let go of your old friend's hands. I mean the older woman, your Granny Mingot, Mrs. Welland, Mrs. van der Luyden. They like and admire you. They want to help you." She shook her head and sighed. "Oh, I know, but on condition that they don't hear anything unpleasant. Aunt Welland put in those very words when I tried. Does no one want to know the truth here, Mr. Archer? The real loneliness is living among all these kind of people who only ask one to pretend." She lifted her hands to her face, and he saw her thin shoulders shaking by a sob. "Madame Olenska, oh, don't, Ellen," he cried, starting up and bending over her. He drew down on one of her hands, clasping and shoving it like a child's, while he murmured reassuring words. But in a moment she freed herself, and looked up at him with wet blushes. "Does no one cry here either? I suppose there is no need to. In heaven," she said, straightening her loosened braids with a laugh, and bending over the tea kettle. It was burnt into his consciousness that he called her Ellen, called her so twice that she had not noticed it. Far down the inverted telescope, he saw the faint white figure of May Welland in New York. Suddenly, Natasha put her head in to say something in her rich Italian. Madame Olenska, again with a hand at her hair, uttered an exclamation of assent, a flushing "gia," and the Duke of St. Austrey entered, plotting a tremendous black-wigged and red-plumed lady in overflowing furs. "My dear Countess, I brought an old friend of mine to see you, Mrs. Stutters. She wasn't asked to the party last night, and she wants to know you." The Duke beamed on the group, and Madame Olenska advanced with a murmur of welcome toward the queer couple. She seemed to have no idea how oddly matched they were, nor what a liberty the Duke had taken in bringing his companion. And to do him justice, as Archer perceived, the Duke seemed as unaware of it himself. Of course, I want to know you, my dear, cried Mrs. Stutters in a round, low, rolling voice that matched her bald feathers and her brazen wig. I want to know everybody who is young and interesting and charming. And the Duke tells me you like music. Didn't you, Duke? You're a pianist yourself, I believe. Well, do you want to hear Cersei play tomorrow evening at my house? You know I have something going on every Sunday evening. It is a day when New York doesn't know what to do with itself. And so I say to it, come and be amused. And the Duke thought you will be tempted by Cersei. You will find a number of your friends. Madame Olenska's face grew brilliant with pleasure. How kind, how good of the Duke to think of me. She pushed a chair up to the tea table, and Mrs. Stutters sank into it delectably. Of course, I shall be too happy to come. That's all right, my dear, and bring your young gentleman with you. Mrs. Stutters extended a hail-fellow hand to Archer. I can't put a name to you, but I am sure I met you. I met everybody here, or in Paris or London. Aren't you in diplomacy? All the diplomatists came to me. You like music too? Duke, you must be sure to bring him. The Duke sat rather from the depths of his breath, and Archer withdrew with a stiffly circular bow that made him feel as full of spine as a self-conscious schoolboy among careless and unnoticing elders. He wasn't sorry for the denouement of his visit. He only wished it had come sooner, and spared him a certain waste of emotion. As he went out in the wintry night, New York again became vast and imminent, and May Welland the loveliest woman in it. He turned into his florist to send her the daily box of lilies of the valley, which, to his confusion, he found he had forgotten that morning. As he wrote a word on his card and waited for an envelope, he glanced about the embowered shop, and his eye lit on a cluster of yellow roses. He had never seen any as sun golden before, and his first impulse was to send them to May, instead of the lilies. But they didn't look like her. There was something too rich, too strong, in their fiery beauty. In a sudden revulsion of mood, and almost without knowing what he did, he signed to the florist to lay the roses in another long box, and slipped his card into a second envelope, on which he wrote the name of Countess Olenska. Then, just as he was turning away, he drew the card out again, and left the empty envelope on the box. They will go at once, he inquired, pointing to the roses. The florist assured him that they would. Chapter 10. The next day he persuaded May to escape for a walk in the park after luncheon. As was the custom in old-fashioned Episcopalian New York, she usually accompanied her parents to church on Sunday afternoons, but Mrs. Welland condoned her truancy, having that very morning won her over to the necessity of a long engagement, with time to prepare a hand-embroidered treasury containing the proper number of dozens. The day was delectable. The bare vaulting of trees along the mall was sealed with lapis lazuli, and arch above snow that shone like splintered crystals. It was the weather to call out May's radiance, and she burned like a young maple in the frost. Archer was proud of the glances turned on her, and the simple joy of possessorship cleared away his underlying perplexities. It is so delicious, waking every morning to smell lilies of the valley in one's room, she said. Yesterday they came late. I hadn't time in the morning. But your remembering each day to send them makes me love them so much, more than if you would given a standing order. And they came every morning on the minute, like one's music teacher, as I know Gertrude Lefferts did, for instance, when she and Lawrence were engaged. Ah, David, laughed Archer, amused at her keenness. He looked sideways at her fruit-like cheek, and felt rich and secure enough to add, when I sent your lilies yesterday afternoon, I saw some rather gorgeous yellow roses and packed them off to the Madame Olenska, Was that right? How dear of you. Anything of that kind delights her. It is odd she didn't mention it. She lunched with us today, and she spoke of Mr. Beaufort's having sent her wonderful orchids, and Cousin Henry van der Leyden a whole hamper of carnation from Skytercliff. She seemed so surprised to receive flowers. Don't people send them in Europe? She thinks it's such a pretty custom. Oh, well, no wonder mine were overshadowed by Beaufort's, said Archer irritably. Then he remembered that he had not put a card with the roses, and was vexed at having spoken of them. He wanted to say, I called on your cousin yesterday, but hesitated. If Madame Olenska had not spoken of his visit, it might seem awkward that he should. Yet not to do so gave the affair an air of mystery that he disliked. To shake off the question, he began to talk of their own plans, their future, and Mrs. Welland's insistence on a long engagement. If you call it long, Isabel Shivers and Reggie were engaged for 2 years, Grace and Turley for nearly a year and a half. Why aren't we very well off as we are? It was a traditional maidenly interrogation, and he felt ashamed of himself for finding it singularly childish. No doubt she simply echoed what was said for her, but she was nearing her 22nd birthday, and he wondered at what age nice women began to speak for themselves. Never, if you won't let them, I suppose, he mused and recalled his mad outburst to Mr. Stellarton Jackson. Women ought to be free as free as we are. It will presently be his task to take the bandage from this young woman's eyes, and bid her look forth on the world. But how many generations of the women who had gone to her making had descending bandaged to the family wealth? He shivered a little, remembering some of the new ideas in his scientific books, and the much-cited instance of the Kentucky cavefish, which had ceased to develop eyes because they had no use for them. What if, when he had bidden May Welland to open hers, they could only look out blankly at blankness? We might be much better off. We might be all together. We might travel. Her face lit up. That would be lovely, she owned. She would love to travel, but her mother would not understand their wanting to do things so differently. As if the mere differently didn't account for it, the wooer insisted. Newland, you are so original, she exulted. His heart sank, for saw that he was saying all the things that young men in the same situation were expected to say, and that she was making the answers that instinct and tradition taught her to make, even to the point of calling him original. Original, we are all as like each other as those dolls cut out of the same folded paper. We are like patterns stenciled on a wall. Can't you and I strike out for ourselves, May? End of the section, page 58.